Hello there, woman beings, and welcome to another episode of the Woman Being Podcast. I am here today, as always, with my lovely, incredible, stupendous, serendipitous, amazing co-hosts, Kelly.
Hello.
And Kellyanne.
Hello, hello.
And I am Emma, and we are here today with another Not Your Mom's Book Club.
Woo-hoo.
We are going to be reviewing the book Eco-Womanism by Melanie L. Harris. Let's dive into it. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
without expectation or judgment.
We will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
Ladies,
Look at this book.
look at this book.
It's deceitfully small.
It is small but mighty.
Small but mighty.
So mighty.
That's for sure. I'm actually curious, what does the print size look like on here?
It's small.
Oh, no, it looks normal.
It's small.
I mean, the footers are small.
The footers are.
The footers.
I started reading the footers and then about
Oh.
a third of the way through abandoned that.
I did not
I didn't
read
read
the
the
footers
footers,
at
I'm gonna
all.
be honest.
There's some good stuff in there.
Sorry, Melanie.
I believe it.
So, ladies, before we get into the
The nerdy gritty.
before we get into the nitty gritty of this book, during Not Your Mom's Book Club, we always drink a beverage. Some might say. So, ladies, what are you drinking today?
Oh, me. I am drinking Sprite. Because I haven't made a pact with myself to not day drink anymore. And day, in my mind, starts or ends at 5 p.m. and
It's 5:05.
It's 5.
So you need to spike that Sprite.
I've got watermelon vodka.
Anyways, so this is some Sprite.
Nice. Some McCafe Sprite, specifically.
In true eco-womanist fashion, yes.
And Kellyanne, what are you drinking?
I am drinking is it Coke? I think it's Coke.
No.
Oh, it's Dr. Pepper. Sorry.
We got a whole thing about this.
I know. I already
She's
forgot.
drunk already.
I decided to be adventurous and mix whiskey and Dr. Pepper. I don't know if that's an actual drink. Could be. But I've just never ordered it or, heard
of
about
anyone.
it. So I just was like, well, whatever.
Yeah. And I can attest that it actually is tasty because I have the same exact thing.
Yeah.
We're twinning.
Twinning.
Aww.
Love.
Cute. Oh, this is not what I expected.
We're spooning. Our hands
For
are
those
spooning.
who are listening only, I held my hand out to her and she put her other hand in backside into my palm.
Spooning hands.
Spooning
Yeah,
hands.
style.
I was expecting like a Tarzan Jane moment and instead this is happening.
I would argue this is more intimate.
What if I didn't want that intimacy?
I'm sorry. Did you not consent?
I did not consent. Please listen to our episode all about consent in order to hear more about that. So, that being said, we might as well just plug ourselves some more. Before we dive into reviewing Eco-Womanism, you, ladies, woman beings of the world and beyond, should review us on Apple Podcasts, give us a little follow on Spotify, give us a subscribe on YouTube, give us a follow on Instagram. We are in all these places as Woman Being Podcast, and we have a website, womanbeingcommunity.com. It's there. You can look at it. You can read some things. You can also access all of our content there. It's a great time. So, that being said, do that. Tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your dog, tell everyone that you know. The end.
Please and thank you. Amen.
Hallelujah. So, ladies, we are talking about Eco-Womanism. I'm very excited. This was my book club pick. In case you guys haven't figured it out yet, we each pick a book throughout the season, and that's the book that we read. This is Eco-Womanism. Can I actually read what the underline is?
Please do.
It is African American Women and Earth Honoring Faiths by Melanie L. Harris. It has this beautiful, drawing illustration of this African American woman on the front. And it was my pick because I'm trying to just like shoehorn some environmentalism into the podcast.
It's about time, really, honestly.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about the earth for a whole episode. I cannot wait. I'm wearing my overalls for the occasion, so I feel like a farmer.
Connected, super connected and grounded, that one.
Yes. So, to give you folks who are listening, woman beings, a little bit of context, Dr. Melanie L. Harris, who wrote this book, is an associate professor of religion and ethics at Texas Christian University. She is an author of multiple books and essays, including Eco-Womanism, obviously. And she has her PhD from Union Theological Seminary in New York City. She is a very cool womanist theologian who is basically an all-around baddie, is what I would say. But this book, Eco-Womanism, is essentially her almost like dissertation, it feels like, of proclaiming what Eco-Womanism is, the steps that sort of the eco-womanist process goes through, both as like a theory and then also as praxis, which I actually had to Google what praxis meant. It means like practically applying a theory.
It means practice.
Practice.
Yeah.
It's the same.
I was very annoyed
in
when
practice,
I read that.
aka praxis, which sounds almost the same. She uses that word a lot. She is obviously very deeply academic and well-researched, and she is in the academic world as she is a professor and just does a ton of research. So it's a very meaty book, no pun intended, because meat is not very environmentally friendly.
It doesn't talk about meat at all.
It doesn't.
Actually.
It actually doesn't talk about diet really at all. But the book essentially is her exploration of what eco-womanism is, and then talks a lot about the ways that other womanist scholars, teachings, writings, ponderings, whatever, also intersect with eco-womanism, feed into eco-womanism, as a term that I'm not sure if she coined the term, but she definitely isn't the only person that uses the term. Other people use the term as well. And so I'm not sure if she's the source of it or if she's just someone who's made some exhaustive content about it. But yeah, so that's essentially... That's like the broad, it's like hard to summarize the whole book because it covers a lot.
Yeah.
But we're going to dive into all the nitty gritty of things within this book. So
I would add, like, it's basically an approach to environmentalism from a African-American female perspective or womanist perspective.
yeah.
And it talks about all the varying... I don't know, pieces of what makes an eco-womanist, including African-American thought and religion and sharing of memory and faith and how history and justice work. It's very intersectional. I don't know.
I agree.
It's a lot of things.
I think intersectional is the word for sure because it addresses so many, all of the big isms, sexism and racism and literally all of the things that you could possibly social justice wise address.
Yeah.
It approaches that from a very intersectional perspective and with the opinion or thesis, whatever you want to call it, of actually all these things can flow into environmental justice and the exploration of that. So, it was a big one.
It takes a lot of stabs at colonialism and white supremacy and how our sort of dominion, domination ways of thinking both affect problems that we see in environmentalism, not problems in environment, but problems with the earth that have been caused by this way of thinking, in addition to social justice issues that have been caused by the same types of thinking. So there's a lot of parallels there as well.
For sure.
For sure. And I feel like we're like tiptoeing around it. But I was curious to hear from you guys, based off of your reading of this book and sort of as you have been reflecting on it, how do you define eco-womanism as a term?
I think for me, I would define Eco-Womanism as a very new baby to the concept and conversation. Is basically
You're the baby?
Me. I'm the
Okay.
baby.
Gotcha. I
Yeah.
thought you were saying that eco-womanism was
no,
itself
no.
a baby of a concept.
No.
So I was just clarifying.
I'm saying me. I am a baby, I feel
Yeah.
like, in this topic. Basically, the importance of caring for others and the earth can all be wrapped up into one kind of umbrella term. Again, kind of like what you both said, from the perspective of the African American or African female. And I mean, it addresses a lot of things. It talks about eco-memory, which was a new word for me, and understanding that. And, you know, like, and basically, like what I said earlier, environmental justice, social justice, kind of all wrapped up into one thing. I mean, it talks about literally, like, everything. Every wrong, I feel like, or most wrongs.
So eco-womanism as a term is a term that addresses all of the wrongs,
Yes.
essentially.
It's-
Anything that violates personhood,
Yes.
whether that is personhood in terms of, like, people
Human.
being violated or even, like, earthly
Earth.
violations, animals being violated,
yeah.
etc.
I think it talks a lot about beings, like beings, period,
Yeah.
and their ability to be.
Yeah.
And are as mankind, specifically white mankind, removing that right from people, animals, the earth, so on. So that's kind of my current understanding. Again, it was a lot of information, and I'm still like wrapping my head around all of it. So
For sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of different steps to it and a lot of different like pieces of it, and so like kind of wrapping it up in one thing feels daunting. How would we define feminism? It's like it's a movement, a way of thinking. It's a set of beliefs.
Mindset, sure.
Yeah, a mindset maybe, and I would say very similar. Eco-Womanism is it's a theory or a approach to life.
Yeah.
That approaches environmentalism through the lens of African American female experience in all aspects of that experience. So, including history of African American women, including connection to nature, including spirituality, including social justice work, including relation to humans, including the effects of white supremacy on Black female bodies. And all of that is kind of wrapped into one as a holistic approach towards a more whole and universally respectful society, is how I would define it.
I think, yeah, those are really great. And it's interesting because sometimes I wonder, like, are these terms necessary? It's like, oh, why couldn't we just, reclaim feminism?
Sure.
Or why couldn't we just recognize that feminism and environmentalism overlap and
They're linked.
intersect?
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's also ecofeminism,
Right.
which is also a practice and a mindset and whatever. But I've been intrigued by womanist thought for a while and have listened to quite a few womanist scholars, and I recognize the desire to have a separate term that sets apart womanists from feminists because of the history of colorblindness within feminism, because of the history of exclusion of people of color within feminism, and the desire to say, okay, well, we aren't going to do that. We're going to be more inclusive, more holistic, and so we are womanists. I actually Googled the other day, can white women be womanists?
I've been wondering the
What
same
came
thing.
up?
And
Can
I'm
white
like,
women be
I
eco-womanists?
don't know that we are like that's something that we get to have, you know? Like, I don't know. And I didn't get really any conclusive answers on that. I don't know that other people are necessarily asking that question, at least not on the internet through a quick Google search.
Right.
And so it seems to me like it's something that is more for people of color to use as a tool for explaining how they want to go about liberation and how they want to go about being different from the way that the feminist movement has been in the past. And I will say that Melanie also quotes multiple women who identify as feminists.
Yes.
And so I don't think that it's necessarily like animosity towards feminists explicitly, or that like being a feminist is a bad thing. I think that it's more that this redirection to a different term is a way to call out that this is different from the way feminism has long been understood. And I think that adding eco onto the front of that, because really womanism and feminism in themselves should also be eco. Like they should intersect with all these things and be concerned with liberation in multiple paths and in multiple spheres, because they all intersect and affect one another. Like if you are feminist but like don't care about the environment, you're harming women all over the world. And so the term eco being added onto it, I feel like is also a tool to say we are calling to mind that this is something we're focused on. And it's not to say that someone who just calls himself a womanist is not also environmentally minded, but saying eco-womanist is a way to call attention to that and be like, hello, this is front of mind. And so I feel like, to me, it feels like it's a tool to help communicate this intersectionality that this book is all about, and a way to bring that to the forefront. And yeah, I could say lots more things about it, but that's sort of my understanding of Eco-Womanism.
It's definitely like a theoretical, philosophical book. It's not as much a like practical application kind of book.
But it is praxical.
But it is practical. I was so mad when I like looked up the definition for that and was like, it's just practice. Anyways, whatever, it's fine. There was actually a couple situations, many situations, I shouldn't say a couple. There were many times reading this book that I had to like Google words.
Same.
No shame in that.
No, I think you should. If you feel like you're not understanding what they're saying, Google what the words are. We have the World Wide Web at our fingertips.
Exactly.
Utilize it.
You know.
I even wrote down definitions in my Kindle.
Well done. Well done.
So that I would remember in case I forgot.
So I Googled diaspora. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I've always heard diaspora.
Diaspora?
But I don't know if that's correct.
I Googled pedagogy.
Oh, pedagogy, yeah.
Oh,
Pedagogy?
yeah. That's a good one.
I Googled
anthropocentric. Yeah. Oh, not Anthropocene era is the era we're in.
Yes.
Right? That's what I Googled. I knew anthropocentric, but I'd never heard Anthropocene era.
I also Googled Anthropocene.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's probably more. But
yeah,
pedagogy I was annoyed by because in the sentence that it was in, she said something about learning and pedagogy. And then I look up pedagogy and it's essentially like learning.
Yeah.
And I was like, come on.
So learning and learning.
Yeah. Although I get it. I mean, I like using synonyms for words at times. And
sometimes
things.
they can encapsulate slightly different things. But just forewarning, it is a very academic book. For me, what I found really helpful in it was taking notes as I was going through, underlining things, just to keep track of my brain. Like in the beginning of the book, I had to read it out loud a little bit. Like I went and sat in my backyard and let the cat run free.
Yeah.
And would read it out loud to myself, and that helped me with like comprehension. And then towards the end of the book, I feel like I sort of started to absorb her rhythm and her way of speaking and her voice, and so then it was a lot easier to read.
Sure.
I couldn't tell. I did I did a similar thing. I read some things to James, read some things out loud to myself, but then I couldn't tell if her verbiage just got a little less academic or if I was like in it with her. Like I wasn't sure.
I feel like it's probably a combination of both, because there were so many terms that we were introduced to at the beginning of the book, like and what her meaning of them was, and then like towards the end, you're like, she's still using all those same terms.
Yeah.
It wasn't like she continued to introduce
It's
tons
sort of like,
new.
okay, I've educated you about these things. Now I'm going to like talk to you about them a bit more. Yeah. I feel like we've really exhausted the definition of Eco-Womanism. You know, well, not exhausted because really there's a lot to it.
If you want the exhaustive definition, you should read the book.
Yeah,
really.
read the book Eco-Womanism. That's
it.
the way to do it. But what are some of the things that hit home for you guys? What did you resonate with? What stood out to you?
I mean, I can't lie. A lot of these concepts were fairly new to me. This is probably my first eco-justice exclusively focused read ever.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was like me just trying to grasp the concepts overall. Something that I did, the very beginning of the book, I felt like I really resonated with as she was talking about her mother and her mother's experience of gardening and the way she taught her to sing to her flowers. And like, it was very ethereal, right?
Yeah.
The way it opened up was very romantic, very ethereal. And I resonate with that. I feel a lot of love for the earth. And like, I love to garden. I grew up gardening.
You do have a plant lady hat.
I
or plant
do
mom hat.
have a plant mom hat.
She loves a plant.
So I loved that. I also loved her talking about learning how to sing African American spirituals, because that was something I learned as part of my music education, and we had like a lot of reverence for the communication with African American spirituals and like respect. So that was really cool. I really liked her explaining eco-memory, even though I had a hard time connecting the practical application to the overall text. I kind of like had to grapple with that a little bit, but I like that idea, the concept of like inherited memory. There's a lot of interesting studies around that with animals and historical trauma. And so I liked that she brought those things in. I thought that was a very interesting concept. And I enjoyed her explanation and exploration of that topic specifically. But overall, I think I wouldn't say like I resonated with a ton of it because I was just trying to like understand. And a lot of it, again, is from like the African American woman perspective, which is obviously not my experience.
What?
And so, I did also like, though, that she did mention several times throughout the book, she would mention Native American women as well. And so I appreciated her like tipping her hat, her little homage.
Well, which you are part Native American as
very
well.
Very small. I would say I have Native American lineage. I wouldn't claim to be Native American. Yeah. But I have a ton of respect and love and appreciation for Native communities and history. And, I grew up hearing stories about my dad learning to hunt on the reservation and going to stomps. And, like, that is very much a very treasured thing in our family. And so I liked her tipping her hat to that as well. I think those are all the things off the top of my head. I did like a lot of further on in the book, I feel like she harkened back to her definition of eco-womanism that she explained very long form at the beginning of the book, which was helpful for me to actually reroute into the point, essentially, of the text, so I didn't get lost, because it was, like, summarized. And I was like, okay, thank you. Because it wasn't until, like, chapter 2 or 3, I feel like, that she was like, this is the definition. And I was like, okay, thank you. Because I was, like, having a hard time stringing all this stuff together. I liked that she reminded you of those things as she explored different topics.
But yeah, stuff that hit home for me. Well, first of all, I just wanted to respond to a piece of, you had mentioned the eco-memory piece of it, which essentially, well, let's see, where do I start? I think overall, the one thing that was most precious to me was seeing themes in some of the stuff that we try and do with this podcast interwoven into this woman's theory of Eco-Womanism. And there were a lot of special moments to me that, like, maybe confirmed the purpose in what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that was precious.
Yeah.
And then in that, You want to say something? You just say it. Go for it.
No, I actually there was a moment that I called out where I was like, this is what I hope woman being is.
That's amazing.
And I want to read it, but I'm going to cry.
Aww. I actually have a little piece of it that I underlined, and I wrote in my book. I'm like, "Woman being?" ?
Yeah. The part that stood out to me that I pointed out, my note says, "My hope is that woman being is this. That woman being as a term is this," and it is on location 1619.
Kindle edition.
In the Kindle edition, it says, while womanism certainly praises communities established and maintained by and for women, it does not exclude men to the point of male bashing. This is important in the light of the fact that at the time that Walker was constructing the definition of womanist, many strains of white feminism being practiced were vehemently opposed to allowing men to participate in the feminist movement. The emphasis on both community and wholeness in the second part of the womanist definition points to Walker's, which this is Alice Walker she's talking about, value of community and wholeness for all, including all genders. Thus, the definition of womanist is gender inclusive. Mm-hmm. And I read that and instantly thought of woman being as the idea of being a way to acknowledge the humanness in all people. Mm-hmm. And even though woman is in the name in the same way that woman is in the title womanist or feminine is in the title feminist, it is about liberation and respect for all people. Mm-hmm. And I felt very moved by that, mm-hmm. that idea. And that's something that I feel like we didn't even necessarily think of woman being as being when we started this podcast and when Kelly came up with this name. But I think that that's what it's come to mean for us in a lot of ways, is that it is it's acceptance and it's compassion and inclusion. And so that was one of the things that stood out to me in that. But sorry, I'm not commandeer your...
I'm so glad, though. I have to just add to the group. I also highlighted it and was like, damn, that's really good. I can get behind that. I hope we do that.
Yeah. No, I think that's super... Well, but circling back to eco-memory in this, I think the reason that eco-memory, this idea of like recalling memories of African-American and Black like stories and related to their relationship with the earth is so important is because in a lot of ways the prevailing narrative of our history as a country is a very white narrative. And so what is considered truth or factual in what we learn growing up in our education system and in all the major books and in all the major media is a very specific story and a very single story, and it doesn't necessarily include like a wide gamut of wisdom brought forth by the African American and Black communities that have been such a huge part of building this country that we live in and reap the benefits of. And so that to me resonated because one of our core values as a podcast has been this idea of uplifting stories and holding a platform for the voices that are less heard, and helping to bring forth new ideas that are not that may be counter to the prevailing narrative in main spaces. And so I can see why that is such an important, crucial piece of womanist and eco-womanist practice. But also, like, I think it's so important in general. Like, we see Hollywood moving in this direction. We see a lot of, like, more mainstream things moving in the direction of telling the stories of the marginalized. And in that telling, like, we elevate our society, I think. But, so that was one piece of it. And then another piece of it that I wanted to bring up was in the chapter Eco-Womanism 101, where she's trying to kind of explain the entire concept. But she brings up African cosmology and how a lot of spirituality is woven into varying African backgrounds. But African cosmology, the act of witnessing the Earth's beauty that Hooks describes, is evidence of a relational connection between the Earth, as the beautiful, being honored, observed, and enjoyed, but not consumed by the witness, the being. And so, sort of this, like, reference to, like, the being, the human as being, and we are all a part of this, like, ecosystem of beings. Mm-hmm. And we have this honor of observing this beautiful Earth, and our relationship to her is actually so much more profound than white colonial thinking has raised me to understand. Mm. And so something foreign to me, but also something very beautiful to me in like sort of starting to think of the Earth as more a part of me and like as a community, more a part of each other. So but yeah, that was where I wrote woman being in the margin. Aww. Just the idea that like woman being is not just, you know, an individual, which I think has been my probably more like default definition of it, but woman being is like us being together and we're all part of one thing. So.
Yeah. I think that at times, like with our, at least for me, with my, you know, white colonial upbringing, I will feel like I want to like have like a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of like Earth as a being or animals as beings or all these things. And like I don't want to, like, this is not really the time to dive into the nitty-gritty of, like, you know, do animals have souls or that kind of thing, which I think is the Christian question often. Right? And I have my own conclusions about that. I think that that's irrelevant in this conversation because they are living beings, no matter what. No matter, like, you can't deny that. And you actually made me think of another section. I'm going to read a lot of the books, you guys, probably today.
You guys don't even need to get the book. You just listen to this podcast. Listen to this
podcast because I have so much underlined.
I'm like, but still get the book and support her.
Yes, but you should. You should support this amazing scholar of a woman and buy her book. But in location 1558 in the Kindle edition, she says... she's referencing someone who, she references a lot of different people. I'm trying to see who is she referencing here. I think it is Dorcetta E. Taylor. She says, she suggests that honor, agency, and worth ought to be extended to parts of nature so that trees, birds, lakes, rivers, mountains, and streams existing in safe sanctuaries, such as public parks, cannot be torn down and polluted. And it was sort of like serendipitous that I was reading this while also starting to try to really educate myself about Indigenous people, especially in our area. I've been listening to a lot of content about the tribes in Northern California. And there was an episode of a podcast that I listened to called West Coast Water Justice. And it is a great podcast, very informative. And the woman who runs it interviews all sorts of people who are involved in water justice work on the West Coast, where we are. And there's an episode all about land rights in it that this made me think of. I think land rights are really fascinating, this whole idea, because sort of the premise of this podcast episode was that if corporations and companies get rights and can be seen as human beings, then why can't the land also?
Yes.
And there have been multiple court cases that surround this. In this episode that I was listening to, she interviews attorney Doug Obeji. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right. I'm really sorry if I'm not. I didn't check beforehand because I'm a
We
bad
know you're listening, Doug.
person. But he talks about how if corporations who get rights like freedom of speech, or where the law treats them as a legal person and says they have the standing to sue and to be sued without the people within that corporation receiving any of the repercussions, then why couldn't land also operate under that understanding of the law, which is honestly, well, we won't go into what I think about that law.
I mean, it almost feels like our land that we all live in and we all depend on. Like, we have a very symbiotic relationship with the earth. Like, we're very dependent on one another.
Yeah.
And it seems kind of crazy that we would place more, I don't know, value on a corporation than we would our earth. Like,
yes.
The earth seems to need, like, more representation than a corporation.
Yeah.
Like, as it sustains all of our lives.
I would agree. I think, personally, I would strip corporations of those rights, and I would give those rights to the land. But that's my personal opinion. That is not necessarily the woman being opinion.
On woman being.
But that's my hot take on that. I just wanted to share that with you guys because I'm almost done with my drink.
She doesn't care.
But it's this idea that, like, for example, if a dam is going to be built and is going to disrupt an entire ecosystem, is going to flood an area and totally change the way that that river system works and the way that that water operates, the way that the fish that migrate across that water are able to move and to live, if that's going to be affected, then shouldn't they get the same rights to be advocated for and to have someone step in and speak on their behalf when obviously, you know, the water cannot speak on its behalf in the Supreme Court, but a person could. And so it's this idea that, like, land rights are something that it seems, based off of the current understanding of the way that the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution work under the Supreme Court, that land would receive those rights because corporations do. And so that was really fascinating. And it was cool that I was listening to that while also reading this. It felt very serendipitous is the only word that I can use for that.
Serendipitous.
Yeah.
What a good word.
Yeah.
I don't think she used that one in the book.
But yeah, I think along those same lines, one of the other things that hit home for me was, and I've always heard of the earth referred to as, like, mother or whatever, or source, but the idea of, like, the earth as a being, and also even drawing the parallels between the way that we've treated the earth and the way that our, again, colonial white supremacist mindsets have informed the way we treat the earth and how that parallels with the way we treat human beings.
Yeah.
And how, like, it's very clear, or at least it feels that way in reading this book, there's such a root issue in how we devalue other people and other beings and our land and the creatures within this earth for the sake of our own gain. And, like, the definition of, like, subdue the earth is very destructive.
Yeah.
And the destruction we cause is only a problem when the complaints get loud enough, honestly, and that's horrible. Like, it should be, like, we should be acting in consideration first. But we actually don't. We don't operate that way.
For sure. Yeah, I would say for sure, it's settled in after a little bit, but, like, the feeling of guilt. Again, I was very, like, preoccupied and consumed with trying to grasp all these concepts and very academic language. I'm dyslexic, if the listeners don't know. So I was actually really impressed with my comprehension, but that's where most of my energy was going while reading. But, like, after the fact,
you're super smart.
Thank you. After the fact, there was a lot of guilt because a lot of what was sitting in me was like, man, like, we brought African people to the United States. We took them from their land, and we took land from Native Americans and, like, pushed them out of their home, ripped someone else's from their home, and said, figure it out. Like, this is the system. And obviously, like, I know that, right? Like, logically, I learned about it. I know about it, all the things. But when you're breaking it down under the umbrella of Eco-Womanism and all the injustices that take place in that realm, like, you're really leaning into the pain of someone else's experience through this kind of a read. And I think that, like, there was a lot of grief, a lot of feeling of guilt, a lot of sadness that I felt. And those are things I already feel. I feel like anytime we talk about, like, more heavier things like this, but much more so for this because it was so in depth and so like, well, and this is directly related to this, and this was because of white people, and also this is also because of white people, and it's just like, oh, it just like hurts.
Super painful.
It's so painful, and it's like she talks a lot about like making. Towards the end of the book, she talks about making amends, essentially, and like righting wrongs, and I'm like, but how? Basically, like I think that's what I left the book with of like. The but how question, because I'm like, she doesn't spell that out for us, and I don't think it's her job to.
Yeah.
But it was like you can't make that right.
Yeah.
Is like what I would say. Like if someone did that to me as a person, like no, we're not making anything right.
Yeah. I think that you can't make it right. You can't go back in time. You can't change what has happened, but you can try to do better.
Right.
You know, moving forward. Like you can try to be different from your ancestors, from even those that are here now. And I think that her connection between African people's bodies and the earth was something that I had never linked. And that
same.
felt very much so like an epiphany for me. As she talks about how like African women's bodies were violated and were raped in order to produce more, in order to create more slaves for more productivity and for more use and abuse and exploitation of white people by white people, not of white people, but for more white people to exploit and use the product of these these Black women's bodies. Similarly, actually very similarly, people took, exploited, used, raped the earth and said, we are going to use you for our own purposes. The only way that you're useful is when you serve the purpose that I have in mind for you. And that's something that I have been learning a lot about in gaining more perspective from Indigenous people in our area, in listening to content from them. It's this idea that land is only useful if it serves your purpose, when in fact land is always quote unquote useful in that it is there, that it is being, that it exists, and that it is providing all that it needs to provide without you coming in and putting your influence onto it. And then there's actually a quote that I, of course, want to read, where one of the moments where this felt very relevant to me. It's in location 425 in the Kindle edition. She says, gendering the earth as mother opens up a gender critique as the logic of domination that subdues the feminine in the culture is revealed. A focus on gender in womanist analysis is paradoxical in that it simultaneously uncovers an innate solidarity between women and the earth. And one of the thoughts that came to mind for me as I read this was that the paradox here is that while gendering the earth as female gives us this like unique kinship with the earth, which I think both of you have touched on, is this idea that like we feel deeply related to the earth. We feel love for the earth. Like I literally I have mostly tattoos about the earth on my body because I feel so much connection to nature. And I think women feel a lot of that connection to this like divine natural being. But this connection also gives patriarchal systems license to subdue the earth in the same way that men subdue women. And then specifically, even further, the way that African women have been subdued and sexualized and exploited and seen as pure property, pure utility. And I hadn't made that connection in recognizing that, like, I knew factually, like, growing up, you learn about how slaves were considered, 3/4 people and how they were property. And we've also learned about how women were property. We've learned about these things in school, but then recognizing like, property means land. Property means earth. Property means a space that you're taking ownership over. And so we have all of this like kinship with earth. As women, African people have all this kinship with earth because they've been forced into it. And I think that was like, it was just sort of like a,
Yeah.
like, I don't even know how to just, like, it was just, my mind was just blown as I read that. In connecting this thing that I've heard for so long but never thought about it in that same way. Because the excuse of property gives you license to utilize that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that actually, I had never really drawn that connection either, and underlined a lot of different sections that that talked about that. And mainly the thing that hit home for me was the mindsets that allow for it. I grew up around animals. My mom trains them, and I've always kind of had an understanding that, or maybe not even understanding, but I've always I'll keep an eye on people because watch the way people treat their animals and you learn a lot about them.
Yeah.
And if they don't treat their animals well, they're probably not going to treat people well. And in that same, and so I've always just known that because I have a really, I would say, deep connection to animals. I love them and I always have.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that, of course, that would extend to the earth. Like how you treat people begets how you treat animals begets how you treat earth, and back up the chain is this idea of like having respect for the sacredness of what like literally sustains our life, you know? And especially as like with the analogy of mother, you know, like mother will sacrifice a lot to, you know, for you to thrive, right? They'll do anything. They'll die for you.
Yeah.
But when we grow up, we have to then return that like sacrificial love with very deep respect for what was done on our behalf. And I think, so I think in that the earth, she's resilient and she's very sacrificial, but also like we have to grow up as a society and give her the respect that she's due, because right now she's not in a good state.
Yeah.
And it feels like the people that talk about it, the scientists that continue to purport the same information, just continue to be ignored. And we prefer profit over like living for the next 50
true
years.
human flourishing, I would argue. We prefer making a dollar over, you know, the well-being of the world.
It's like we're all collectively putting in our bets for the destruction of our own race and the earth together.
Because the thing is, the earth will keep going.
Right.
But we might not.
Yeah.
Like, that's the perspective that I'm at. Like, this is self-destructive. The earth is resilient, like you're saying. Like, she is powerful and able to carry on. But she's also able to weed out when there's a virus. And that might be us. And that's, like, that feels, like, extreme to say, but it's the way it is.
No, it's fair. I mean, similarly to what you were saying, I grew up with a deep respect for the earth and like the idea that, I don't know, just her spelling it out so clearly in the book. And like, I've just always kind of thought of the earth as sacred. Like that is like the idea that she is mother, she is holy, like she is good, all that. And I think the idea that, like you said, correlating the earth to a woman's body that has been violated, I think is something really interesting to chew on that I'll probably think about for a while. But I think, like I was like literally even a few weeks ago telling James, isn't it so weird that we like cover the earth with like this material we call cement? Like, isn't that bizarre? And he's like, well, yeah, but like cars wouldn't move like if we didn't do that. I was like, but babe, listen, we are ripping up grass, leveling out dirt, and then putting like a hard surface on top of it. How bizarre is that? Like, we're just putting a blanket on the earth.
Well, and cement sounds a lot like semen. So really, it's the patriarchy.
It's always the patriarchy.
It's always the patriarchy.
That was obviously satirical, but also I've thought about that before.
I mean, it's just, anyway, I don't know that I have a point. I'm just like, yeah, obviously the earth is sacred. Like, I don't, like, my uncle is like an environmental lawyer, and his job is to basically be like, no, you can't build here because guess what? There's an endangered woodpecker that would be displaced if you were to build here. So sorry, find some different land. And it's very, like, where I come from, it's very common to think of the earth as sacred. And so, I don't know, just her spelling everything out is just kind of like, oh, like, again, I just have a lot of information to chew on for a while. And I think it's going to be a huge learning curve for me in general.
Yeah. Well, I think that, first of all, like, I appreciate that you guys took the time to read this book that I feel like was pretty different from other stuff that we've read on the podcast, and was something that I saw as a way to sort of like introduce this idea of, you know, environmentalism into our canon.
What an introduction it was.
Yeah, and I mean, I hadn't read the book either, so I didn't know to what extent it did that, and et cetera, et cetera. But I really appreciate you guys taking that time to do that and to like dive into something that might have felt uncomfortable or felt out of your depth or whatever. There were definitely times that I felt exactly the same way, even though I'm steeped in a lot of environmentalist content a lot of the time. But I appreciate you guys doing that.
You're welcome, but thank you, because there's no way that I would ever have read this book if it had not been a group decision with a deadline.
Yeah.
There's just no way it would happen. Do you know what I mean?
It is a hard book to get through. But I feel like there's a few more things that I want us to like dive into and talk about, but I feel like we've been sort of dancing around this one thing, and so I want to go into it first, which is that idea of eco-memory, especially, Kellyanne, as you've been bringing up, like this history that you've had with the environment and with your family being involved to an extent with Indigenous community, and Kelly with your family and growing up with animals and growing up on the farm, and you've had so much interaction with nature. I'm curious if there were any like eco memories that came to mind as you were reading the book, or anything that it just sort of resurfaced for you.
I mean, I think I just miss red dirt in general.
You miss red dirt?
I miss red dirt. I in Oklahoma, we have a lot of red clay in our dirt.
Oh, you miss red dirt?
Yeah, I miss red dirt. I thought
you were saying that you misread dirt.
Oh, no.
Like, as in you read dirt incorrectly.
I miss red dirt.
You wish that you were with red dirt once again.
I do. I mean, there's something like that I really have always loved about Oklahoma dirt. And like as a kid, you go out and it's muddy and your jeans get stained red, and that's just how it is. And I miss like having like real weather. Like here in California, it's very like chill. Like it's
very temperate.
It's like hot and fire season, and then it's like fine.
Yeah.
The rest of the time. We have like a month or two of like actual kind of cold. And so I miss like having full seasons. I miss tornadoes, actually. I miss storms.
I miss storms. Yeah.
And like real weather, like where you feel like the earth, Mother Nature, whatever, is like throwing a fit, and you just get to like be there.
It feels cleansing.
It is, and you feel the electricity in the air.
It's powerful.
Something makes you feel like you always know when a storm's coming in. Like always, you can feel it, you can smell it. And so I think that's something I really miss. I think I've always felt like I can't quite connect with California in general, and like it makes me emotional, actually. Like, I just, like, miss my homeland is how I feel. I miss, like, how sweet the wind used to smell and, you know, walking through a field of grain or, you know, whatever it is. So I think in general, it just, like, the idea where she was opening in the book of a lot of people, a lot of African-American people going back to the South because they feel a deep connection with that. I was like, yes, I understand what that is. And so I wouldn't say, like, exclusively I have an eco memory. It's just more like a hearkening back to, like, oh yeah, that's where I'm from. That's like the beauty I used to live in. I used to be mesmerized by, like, our beautiful big magnolia tree that grew in our front yard, and I would sit under it and read and in the grass and in the red dirt, and it was just the best. And so I wouldn't say that it's like, this is my eco memory, but more like a longing to be back in, like, a geographical location.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know if there's any specific eco memories that came up for me while reading the book. However, I would say the main things that I remember or that came to mind are, like, bare feet on grass. Mm-hmm. I feel like I was a lot more connected to just, like, being barefoot running around in the grass and, like, rolling around. I remember when we moved up to the farm, there were sandburrs throughout the grass. And there were, like, sections of the yard that were much worse than others. And so I just, like, learned how to walk, like, barefoot in sort of like a C shape with my feet. Yeah. And you'd sort of, like, get to wherever you needed to go and, like, pluck out a few sandburrs and then continue on your way.
Wow, that's resilience at its finest right there.
But, and then I remember actually when I was even younger, my mom had a garden and we used to, like, plant flowers and mint and tomatoes and things like that when we were young. And I do remember doing that with her. I remember our fence had morning glories all over it. And so in the summertime, the morning glories would bloom in the morning and they're beautiful. I think the lakes are a big thing for me because Minnesota has lakes everywhere. And that's just what you do in the summertime. And so being out on the sand, being in the lake, being in the water, that's was meaningful for me. And then the last one that comes to mind is, like, again, barefoot, but we lived on a dirt road and we had a pretty long driveway. And I just remember, like, running out down the dusty road, like, to the mailbox to get stuff. Yeah. And, so I could probably go on now that you got my brain thinking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. You guys are, like, bringing up eco memories for me, even, like, as you're talking about it. Because it's, like, for me, growing up, like, nature was so much a part of my imagination. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember we had this, like, big, like, willow-like tree in our backyard that, like, created almost like a cavern within itself. And my friends and I would go inside of that, the trees overhang, and we would create whole worlds under there. Yeah. And we would play pretend. And my friends and I would go up to honeysuckle flowers, and we would pull them apart and suck the what is it?
Nectar.
The nectar of the flower, and it was sweet and it was delicious, and that was, like, part of our play. And every year my dad and I would create a garden together. Aww. And, like, we would go out into our backyard and we would dig into the dirt and we would plant all these things together and we would watch them grow throughout the season. And that was what made me fall in love with sunflowers, because they were tall like my dad and I wanted to be like my dad. Yeah. And so, yeah, like, I would run around barefoot in the backyard and I got ringworm from doing that, but I didn't care. Like, it didn't matter because I wanted to go out and play. And it, like, helped to raise me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's, like, as an adult, like, the biggest thing I crave in, like, owning land, owning a home. I'm like, I actually want to create magic for myself again. Like, I want a magnolia tree. I want a weeping willow. I want, you know, that connectedness that I used to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, like I spent so much of my childhood just up inside of trees. Yeah. Like that was one of my favorite things to do, is to go up inside into a tree. But there was another eco memory that came up as I was reading the book that felt particularly revelatory to me, and that is very intersectional for me. And it was actually in the start of the book, after she sort of gives the introduction, she goes through the 7 steps of Eco-Womanism. And we can talk about those more in our critique section. But the 5th step talks about how this one author, her last name is Aduyuye. I don't know that I'm saying her name right. I'm really sorry if I'm not. But she links to Christianity and recognizing the earth as sacred. Mm-hmm. And a really vivid memory came back to me as I read that from when I first became a Christian. I was 15 or 16 years old, and I went to a conference with my church that was a Christian conference, whatever, it's irrelevant. And we ate lunch in the parking lot together as a church. And at the end of the lunch, I walked around and picked up everybody's recycling, because everyone had these cans and bottles and stuff. And I was like, I can pick these up and recycle them. And there was a bit of tension between my beliefs as an environmentalist and my beliefs as a Christian, because I actually was environmentalist way before I was a Christian. Mm-hmm. That was a reality in my life long before God was part of my life. And there was a lot of climate change denial in the Christian environments that I was in.
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah. I remember this story, and I was wondering if you would bring it up.
Yeah, I think I might have told it on the podcast before. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. But
I think very
if
briefly.
I have, then
this is the long version.
Hear it again.
I like it, though.
Listen to it. So I gathered up everyone's cans, and I wanted to recycle them. And my pastor's wife actually questioned me about this. She was like, "Why are you doing this?" And she is such a sweet person. Like, genuinely one of the nicest, sweetest people that I've ever known. And I got the vibe from her in that moment of like, but you're not one of those crazy environmentalists, right? Like that was sort of the way that I read it. Mm-hmm. And I quickly assured her that my environmentalism was rooted in God's call for us to steward the earth, and that we should care for this place that God gave us, regardless of whether climate change was real or not, but that we are stewards and that we should take care and we are responsible. You know, we don't get exempt from responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I literally made this up as I said it to her. I had never thought about that before. Like I said, I was like 15 or 16. I was dumb. And so in that I had very little life experience, very little pondering, very little deep thought that was going on in my head, you know? And as I said that, it like became true for me. And I came to this realization as I was saying this to her, and this realization has stuck with me from then on, that my passion for environmental justice is in no way incongruent with my faith. That they're one and the same. That there doesn't have to be any distinction between the two, because Eco-Womanism, Eco-Feminism, and Christianity, or faith in general, because faiths, in a broad speaking way, are meant to bring about, you know, human betterment, right? And human betterment and environmentalism can't be torn apart from one another. Mm-hmm. They are inextricably linked. Mm-hmm. And so that was like an eco memory that like rushed back to me, where I was like, oh, this was like when I decided that environmentalism was absolutely a part of my faith in God. And that felt very, very pivotal to me. It felt, as I was reading part 5 of the Eco-Womanism sort of steps that she lays out, it felt the way that I felt while like reading the Bible, you know? It felt very much so like this is a revelation from the divine. And this idea of eco-memory is really powerful. Kelly Ann, you sort of talked about what was the purpose of eco-memory in this, or like what is the reason to bring this up? But one of the things that Melanie says in the book is how to care for the earth is to care for the self, and vice versa. We can't care for the earth without caring for ourselves. And we can't care for ourselves without caring for the earth. And so I think that eco-memory is a way to remember how deeply we do care for the earth, is to remember how deeply connected we are to the earth. Because I think that especially like childlikeness very much so lends itself to recognizing and truly feeling our connection to the earth. Because as we get older, all these things like, you know, making money and being successful and tamping down other injustices sort of start to flood our minds and our concerns, and the environment, the earth, this divine being that was so much part of our childhoods, like takes a back seat. And I've been guilty of that, where it's like I forgot this, like this first love that I had, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, one of the things I find, like you sort of talk about, like caring for self is caring for the earth and vice versa. There's actually tons of therapeutic benefits to caring for the earth. Like gardening has huge psychological benefits, as does like working with animals. And you see people like,
or even having houseplants.
or even caring
Like
for
small
houseplants is like it's really important. Is people with PTSD, people who are working through trauma, working through grief, working through any sort of myriad of, you know, issues that life brings, have found healing, deep healing in caring for the earth, whether that's through gardening or having plants in the house, or, you know, taking care of a cat, or, you know, I love working with horses when I can. You know, there's a deep spiritual significance there that actually like brings healing. And I don't know. The earth, she's got a lot of benefits if we are willing to mind them. Yeah.
But like mine is a hard term, because it's like that implies stripping, right?
Sure.
But I know that's not your intent in that, but it's funny because it's part of the way we talk about it, right? Is we'll say like we're mining the earth and that we are stripping resources. And I do the same exact thing, you know? It's hard to find ways to talk about the earth that are not anthropocentric, that are not human-centered, that are not centered on like how we benefit and how we can gain, which is fascinating. Just, and I don't have a solution, you know?
Yeah, but I think like without human benefit, what are we doing, right? Like, it has to be beneficial because we're symbiotic, right? There is no existence or relationship with the earth that, you know, like does not mutually benefit both, unless one is like doing harm to the other.
Yeah. But it either mutually benefits or mutually destroys.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's the hope, right? The focus of like, how can we actually coexist and come alongside the earth? I've been going on a hunting education, deep dive. And a lot of, you know, people that do hunting to, one, feed themselves and their family, to help with like overpopulation, because that's a huge thing. Like a lot of these larger animals don't have predators, or they're actually stamping out other species, or let's get real, like a lot of them die really horrible deaths. And so like learning that and like how do we create systems that actually work alongside the earth, don't harm the earth, and are ethical all around for all beings. And I think that's been the most interesting thing, learning from good hunters that actually really care about conservation, that care about taking care of the planet. They're like, it should hurt you actually to take an animal's life.
Yeah.
Like, it's not actually comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue hunting is one of the most environmentally friendly ways to consume meat. But something like overpopulation of deer is actually also a consequence of human interference.
A lot of it is us.
Because, for example, we nearly exterminated the population of wolves in the United States.
Yeah.
And so natural predators were eliminated for the sake of our livestock.
Yep.
And therefore, wild populations also grew and overpopulated. And so we get tons and tons of deer in the United States because they don't have the natural predators they used to have. And so it's like, as you keep going back, it's like, yes, this is a more ethical way to consume animals, but it's also a product of the way that we've treated the earth in the past.
Totally. Like axis deer is a perfect example. It's from Africa. It doesn't belong here, has no natural predators, and they're in the south of Texas. And like,
is this a breed of deer?
It's a breed of deer. Axis deer.
Yeah.
And it's a huge problem that a lot of conservationists, a lot of ethical good hunters talk about often. And they're like, guys, this is like why we can't do these things, basically. And it's more recent that the population has just exploded, and it's a huge problem. Like, there's so many of them. And so I think part of that is also like, how do we correct what we have done or what has been done? But it's interesting too, just thinking about it that way of like, how do we actually come alongside and partner with the earth, partner with the other populations?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's so many things that I would love to dive into that this book talks about, that Melanie, along with all the other people that she references, dive into. I think that recognizing our guilt, that we are culpable in all of these acts of environmental injustice, while also striving to move forward in a better way, is so important. And I think that's what you're hitting on there with these hunters, because it's like, oh, we've brought these deer over from Africa, but now they're here, and now they live here, and now this is their home. And so how do we steward this well? How do we coexist with them well? And because those deer didn't get a say in that,
Yeah, they didn't do anything.
They're making the most of the situation they were handed, essentially.
They have happy, large fields and no predators.
Yeah.
They live a stress-free life.
And there's so much I would love to touch on between, like, there's a term that Eco-Womanism, the book, introduces called life system that I loved, which is a way of thinking about religion and spirituality that I relate to a lot, in terms of thinking that you are you're thinking of religion in a much more inclusive space. And there's so much that we could go into, so many rabbit trails I could go down. But ladies, I want to hear from you what your critiques of this book are. I feel like we've sort of brushed a little gentle brush against what some potential critiques could be. But I want to hear your critiques, because I mean, every book has its pros and cons, you know?
I don't know if there are actually any critiques of this that I have other than what I've already said. It's short but dense. I do feel like the language is highly academic, which is great. She's very smart. I used to have to write papers like this in college, and I would make them sound as smart as I could, and my professors loved it. So I understand that there's like a reverence for that type of communication. I would love to see a more like accessible, practical application approach to eco-womanism as a way of life. Because I think we've started like getting into that territory of like, what do we do about meat and soil and recycling and things like that? But Eco-Womanism as a book doesn't really address any of those specific things. It's more so like the mindsets and theories and cultural ways of thinking that like inform how we make decisions about those types of specifics, which honestly, I don't know if it needed that maybe because there's so much literature out there about how to care for the environment. But as a, I don't know, amateur environmentalist, it felt like maybe a few steps ahead of where I'm at as far as like environmentalism goes, as far as being introduced to African American and Black ways of thinking and like how intersectionality is a huge piece of the puzzle. I think it was super great. So I really value that. And I would say my takeaways probably lean more towards not the environmental conversation from this book at all. It would probably be more so like the cultural, historical, and justice-oriented pieces of it that resonated with me most. But yeah, I don't have a ton of critiques.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say similarly, it was not the most accessible book.
Yeah.
And I don't know that she meant it to be accessible. I think that she, as a scholar, writing for scholars in a lot of ways, I think that the way that she sort of dove into these like steps of eco-womanism right at the start of the book felt quite jarring to me. It felt like, oh, we are diving straight in and I still don't know that I really know what eco-womanism is, but you're telling me the steps of how to apply it. And that felt like, oh, I don't know what's happening. But then there was a lot more, which we touched on this, there's a lot more clarity as you go towards the end of the book of like, oh, this is how this connects, and this is how this connects, and these things are all applying to one another. And so I don't know that I know the better way she could have done it in terms of setting the stage, because the sort of like ground setting that she does at the beginning does set the stage for what we read later on in the book. But I did feel a bit just sort of lost in the beginning, or sort of like, okay, I don't get what this really is, though. You're telling me how to use something that I don't know what it is yet. So that was my thing. And
yeah, like even I think it's like chapter 6 that we learn what womanist is
Yeah.
officially.
yeah,
You know? And
yeah.
so-
And I mean, and I was thinking about this as I read it, because I was like, well, I know what a womanist is, but I don't know that you guys know what it is. And I'm worried that you're sitting here like, what the heck is she talking about? And so, and it's not like a common term that people just like come in contact with all the time. So it's not something that the public necessarily would know, like this is what womanism is. And yeah, we don't get the definition until quite late into the book.
yeah.
Yeah, I have similar critiques. Like you said, she's a scholar, she is an academic. It is heavily, well, I don't know. A lot of it, like I said earlier, the book starts out very ethereal and then it jumps into the more academic, and that felt a little jarring to me. And this is a critique that I have of other academics. This is not the first one, but it felt like she was writing this to impress her peers. And because of how much like academic language was packed in, and obviously that speaks to her education, her experience, her research, and all those things, which is valuable. But I'm like, what is a normal person, what is like the average person supposed to get? Like you said, she might have not written it for this. This book does feel a little bit more advanced to me in the form of like eco education. I think the organizing of some things felt a little off because, like we all, I think, said, is towards the end of the book, you hit a rhythm and you're like, okay, I'm tracking with you. I get you. Yeah. But you kind of have to just trust the process.
Yeah.
I think I said that I really appreciate her nod to Native American experience. Part of me also felt like a little prickly when she would say that, not because I didn't like that she wasn't bringing it up, but that it was kind of looped in with African experience or African American experience. And I'm like, I don't actually know that that's the same thing. She herself, I believe, is a fourth Native. I think she says earlier in the book. So part of me kind of wishes that had more space if she was going to incorporate it. What else? I had another thing.
I do her talking about Indigenous peoples was very interesting. I think that I can see how there is the intersection of African thought and Indigenous American thought.
Yeah.
In that they're both peoples that were displaced from their places of origin
I agree with you.
Colonizers in some respect, and who were forced to adapt within that.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that was super valuable to me that she brought up was sort of breaking down our stereotypes around Indigenous peoples, whether that be Indigenous Africans or Indigenous Americans. Because there's so often this idea that, like, oh, well, the Indigenous people know the absolute best way to take care of the land because all they care about is the land.
Yeah.
And yes, Indigenous people of Africa and of the Americas have a lot of respect and connection to the earth and to the land, but that also doesn't mean that they singularly have all the answers about that.
Totally.
Which is actually something my dad has brought up to me a lot. My dad dated a Native American woman for a long time. I spent a lot of time going to powwows with her and my dad and different things. I hated her anyways, not because she was Native American, just because she was dating my dad. But the point of that is he's brought up a lot of times, like, well, like, there were times where Native Americans, like, totally messed up these populations of animals because they hunted them too much or different things like that. And that would always make me feel very prickly. I would feel very like, ooh, you can't say that because we committed genocide against Native American people. Like, ooh, we can't say that they did something wrong because we hurt them so deeply.
Yeah.
And this book brought up a lot of that in me and feeling the tension of like, okay, yes, like we should not assume that because people are Indigenous that they have all the answers. But, and this book also recognizes this, is the idea that we need to have diverse thought across the board when it comes to eco solutions. You know, we need to listen to Indigenous people and to colonizers.
Yeah.
We need to listen to all of the ideas because we need communal effort and a holistic view of how to help the environment and how to be good environmentalists. And I think that the stereotype that, like, oh, Indigenous people have all the answers about the earth is harmful because it shows them as single-faceted.
Totally.
And that's not true.
Well, and it also emphasizes our disrespect for what they have contributed, right? Like, it's sort of like, oh, well, they know, but we don't value that. We're not seeking that out. We're not elevating them to positions of power or asking them to run, like, government initiatives. So it's sort of, in some ways, it feels like a patronizing, like, sort of like, oh, well, they're good at that, you know? Like, they can stay over there and, like, love the earth. And, you know, in our Christian, you know, white-centric narrative, you know, like, we don't need to worry about that because the world's ending soon anyways, so.
Right. Well, and it pushes all that responsibility onto that people group as well. Yeah. Like, well, it's your responsibility to have the solutions. And I don't think that's fair. And so that's, again, I appreciated her bringing that up, but again, it was just that internal, like, like, I actually don't know about that. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just, it felt prickly to me. And I would love actually a similar book from the Native American experience and perspective. I think that is equally valuable and deserving of space. And maybe that's what was being brought up in me. I also wish, because the subtitle is African American Women and Earth Honoring Faiths, I actually wish she dove a little more into how that is manifested. She talks, a lot about theory and praxis and those things, but I think kind of like what Kelly touched on is practical application, also like practical example of like, oh, actually, I wish I could know more about like what those earth honoring faiths actually manifest as. It made me more interested to learn, and she touches on some things, but even at certain points she mentions voodoo, and I've learned a very small basic understanding of what voodoo is, and it's fascinating. And I'm like, actually, I would love to know more about how those women and men actually partner with the earth in that spiritual practice. So I think those are a few things that come to mind. Overall, I did like the book. It was very mind-expanding for me, but I was also kind of like, I think she starts off assuming the reader is at a certain level of understanding.
Sure.
I was not there, so I felt like I was playing catch-up.
Yeah. Which maybe some of that is on me, because I sort of like said, let's dive in head first.
No, and that's
but
great.
in some ways, like, we both caught up at the end. So I feel like Kelly said, trust the process. The book, is very dense. It's also very short. And so there's a lot of, conversation left to be had, I think.
Totally.
So in that way, I mean, it's just an introduction, I would say, to Eco-Womanism as a spiritual practice or a theory or mindset.
And I did like it from that perspective. A lot of theory, right? And a lot of, like, research and, like, groundwork. And I think... again, from like a lay person perspective, I would have loved a little more practical, spell it out for me.
Sure.
But again, like it's beautiful. It's clearly a work of a labor of love, and she's well educated, knows what she's talking about. There are pages where literally more than half of it is a footnote. So, like she knows what she's talking about. It was just, I kind of was left with like, but now what?
Yeah.
So.
And you want the answers, right?
Oh, of course I do.
You do.
Fast track me to success, please.
Yeah. One thing I will say to your point, Kelly, about talking about not putting Indigenous people in charge of these things. One thing that's really cool, actually, is that we have right now our first Native American head of the Department of Interior in our United States government.
About time.
She's part of President Biden's cabinet. Her name is Deb Haaland, or Holland. I don't really know how to say her name.
Deb, we know you're listening. We're so sorry.
Yes, sorry, Deb. But she is a Native American woman from New Mexico, and she leads up the department of the United States government that interacts the most with Native people. And actually, in the same podcast I referenced earlier, West Coast Water Justice, they talked about sort of the irony of being able to go back in time and tell, like, George Washington that a Native American was going to lead up the Department of Interior. Woo! And it was going to be a Native American woman, and how wild that would be to him.
That stirs up some feelings.
Yeah. And so I think that all that to say that there's hope. There's some progress.
Oh, I think so.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think we have to. Like, there has to be hope because, I mean, a podcast, I told Emma about this a few weeks ago, like a podcast I was listening to is talking about our soil depletion and how, like, we're set to...
Oh, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
We're set to not have, like, workable soil in 50 years. There's, and it's not, like, a theory. It's, like, happening, And my father-in-law is a farmer. His dad was a farmer. And I think maybe his dad was a farmer. And on my mother-in-law's side, her dad's a farmer. So Ross and I are set to inherit some land at some point in our lives, and what that means and what we're going to do with it is, like, on my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And actually, speaking of, bringing Indigenous people and just more environmentally minded people into the government and into what it looks like to be a nation. There's one other thing that I really wanted us to be able to touch on. And that other thing is something that I hadn't ever really made a connection to. But Harris talks about how like Martin Luther King Jr.'s work was so deeply environmental, and talks about how he recognized that the need for environmental justice was so deeply intertwined with the need for racial justice. And then she brings up the example of Eric Garner, who I think we're all very familiar by now with the sentiment of "I can't breathe." Mm-hmm. It's a sentiment that we've heard multiple times now from African American men whose lives are taken. And she draws the connection in this to Eric Garner's death and his sentiment that I can't breathe, with the fact that he also had asthma, which is something I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And how that connects to the way that the environment that he was in affected his ability to breathe and his ability to live a full life. And it gave me a very visual connection to the ways that our impact on the environment really does intersect with something like, police reform, or, getting rid of racial biases. Those things truly are connected, even though sometimes they feel really far apart. Because the fact that Eric Garner had asthma, that was linked to the environmental sort of trauma that he experienced along with his fellow African Americans in his area, was directly connected to the fact that he was then killed and that his breathing was restricted. I mean, George Floyd was in a similar situation with that. And this book was written before George Floyd's murder. But it rings true still. And it's so deeply saddening that there's still that happening, But I think that was a really important link for me, of recognizing that racial justice and environmental justice are so closely linked. And that's something that I'll just go ahead and say this was sort of my final takeaway from this was the intersectionality of all of it. That's something a sentiment that I've sort of lived by for a while now, is that resolving environmental justice is a way to resolve all injustices. And it's not to say that we solely focus on environmental justice, but that we can't have environmental justice without focusing on other injustices. And that poverty, racial inequality, gender parity, classism, mental health,
white supremacy.
Exactly. All of those things intersect with environmentalism, and harming the environment harms every single one of these veins of injustice. There's a line in the book that reads, "Social justice is earth justice justice is social justice." And this line is really simple, but it feels very all-encompassing to me. It is the sentiment that made me feel so deeply moved to want to advocate for the earth, to want to live in a way that advocates for the earth, to want to live in a way that is preventative of harm rather than perpetuating of harm. And so I wanted us to also touch on that, that intersection of racial justice and earth justice, because there are so many links that she made that I wouldn't have even known about, that aren't addressed because we think of things in such a non-holistic way. We aren't thinking big picture when we hear news about another Black body that has been murdered. While that is traumatizing and crisis-inducing in and of itself, there's so much that we need to consider and recognize the multifaceted way that a conclusion like that has come, that the conclusion of a life has come. And so, all that to say, I would love to hear any of you guys' final takeaways from the book.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to pull a passage, an excerpt from the book, which is from Alice Walker. There's a lot of amazing references to the work of Alice Walker. But she writes in the engaging transformation section, or chapter, there's a chapter about like, how does this change who we are? Like, how do we become better? But she said, the type of love that informs activism reflects my mother's love of beauty, the well-tended garden, and the carefully swept yard, and her satisfaction in knowing everyone in her environment was sheltered and fed. In essence, the assurance of communal well-being, the value of mutual love and respect of the earth support an ethical imperative for earth justice in Walker's work. And so this idea of a mother's love and ensuring that, number one, the yard is cared for because the yard brings sustenance so that everybody can be fed at the table is sort of this idea. And we can't think of it in our small community. We have to think globally, and we have to think across racial barriers, and we have to think across class barriers, and that sort of kind of coming together is, I think, one of the only ways that we're going to, I think that is the hope that I have in solving this environmental crisis, solving racial justice issues, whatever, is sort of this communal holding of hands together. We all have to choose that no one is going to leave the table hungry if we're going to have progress.
Yeah. I love that. There are a few passages I would like to read. The first is, I think what was beautiful to me is, in this book, is the marrying of spirituality and caring for the earth and caring for the self. And it says, the purpose of religion is to order our relationship with both fellow man and with our environment, both spiritual and physical. At the root of it is a quest for harmony between man, the spirit world, nature, and society. And I think for me, that really kind of simplified it and boiled it down to one thing, because overall I was very much like swimming in all of the isms and injustices. And I think having something to hearken back to, at least for me, is very helpful. And then I really love this as well on page 117, pushing the boundaries of the feminist movement to be conclusive of race. Two primary discourse grew out of the struggle: Black feminism and womanism. The term womanist was coined by Walker to distinguish the complexity, subjectivity of Black women and to help explain why their insistence of the acceptance of their whole selves, racial, economic, gender, sexual identity, and more, was important to acknowledge if true social justice was to be achieved. And I think for me, that is something that is very helpful to keep in mind. Again, just something to hearken back to, of the whole self, the togetherness idea. And then finally, on page 119, there's a section called The Womanist Dancing Mind, Method and Interfaith Womanist Dialogue. And I really loved the idea of the dancing mind. And she really kind of expounds on this concept. And I felt like I really resonated with that as someone who's naturally very curious and constantly searching out and exploring. I think it's really important to be intellectually curious. Yeah. And Toni Morrison, I believe, is quoted, there's a certain kind of peace that is not merely the absence of war. The peace I am thinking of is the dance of an open mind when it engages another equally open one, an activity that occurs most naturally, most often in reading/writing the world we live in. The concept of the dancing mind can be summarized as the creation and tending to of an embodied space of peace in which minds meet and dance in openness with one another, absent of harsh criticism and judgment so often associated with religious dialogue, in which one tradition is attempting to convert the other. The dancing mind is a kind of mutually enhancing engagement of thought, creatively writing in the style that is reflective of this kind of mutuality. And so those are my three kind of takeaways. The idea of peace in the sense of I am not trying to convince you of something. I am openly engaging with you. I am understanding the Black female experience in a different level, and also the melding of spirituality and physicality. And I think for me, those are the three things that kind of were my takeaways and the things that like really set nicely in my soul. Again, I will probably be sorting out the rest of the text for quite some time, but I think if those are my three things I kind of come back to and anchor in, I think I feel like I'm not going to float away.
Yeah, that concept of the dancing mind, that really hit home for me as well. First, she tells a story about a Christian and a Muslim woman who are dialoguing about how to bring justice to women's bodies through their own religious perspectives, and are in no way trying to convert one another, but rather to collaborate with one another. And that was beautiful. And then just this idea of the dancing mind being a way of religion that is like agency creating, that is actually this idea that religion is a way for me to ground myself, to root myself, and to receive guidance, but it's not my crusade. It is actually my way of centering, and I loved that sentiment. But ladies, is this book Woman Being Approved?
I mean,
what do you think? Of course.
I harken back to what I said at the beginning. So much of this book put to words some of the things that I feel so passionate about, and that passion has resulted in what this is. You know? So I feel a lot of solidarity with the concepts behind it, and I also feel a further level of education on the topic. There's a lot that I don't know still, and am continuing to learn, and I fully appreciate the opportunity to listen to voices beyond my own experience that don't resonate quite the same way as my white experience does. So, I think 100% it's Woman Being Approved. I think it should be a Woman Being staple.
Woman being staple. I mean, it's all the things that we talk about it's just more researched.
Really?
Well, and it also, you know, obviously connects all of them in ways that maybe we haven't, and it's very eloquent and so many footnotes and all the things, but I'm just like, yeah, these are like the important things. And I think even to push it a little further is like it addresses not a lot of, but some of the ugliness in feminist movement and the response of the womanist movement, which I think is really important, especially for feminists, whatever ethnicity or background you come from, to actually be educated on. Like, we're not all perfect, and it's a learning process. And so I think hearing those experiences and finding ways that we can partner with our womanist and eco-womanist sisters and brothers is really important to empowering each other.
Yeah, I think that, again, there's not necessarily an exclusion of like feminists from this, but it is a different approach and a redeeming approach, and I think it's a guide for us as self-proclaimed feminists to find ways to continue to be intersectional and to incorporate other women in. And, you know, like we said towards the start of the episode, like that's what we strive for women being to be. And so, yeah, like I would approve this for women being.
Very much approved.
Yeah. This is, it's great. And it, yes, is not like, you know, the easiest read in the world.
But at least it's short.
Yeah, it is short.
150 pages.
I think that in the Kindle, it said it's only like a 6 or 7 hour read total. And so it theoretically should, and that's based off of what Kindle perceives my reading speed is, which actually is fairly slow. But it...
No, I think that rings about true for me, I think.
Yeah.
It was about an hour a chapter, I would say.
Yeah.
Except for chapter 2, that one was really long. But I think
that one was like half the book.
Other ones were like shorter, so you know, it evened out.
But I would definitely say woman being, stamp of approval. If you haven't read the book and you've made it to this point of the episode, we've probably spoiled a lot of things for you, but I would still recommend reading it.
Totally.
Especially because there's so much that you can reference within it. There's so much we didn't even touch on that I wanted to touch on. And this will be, you know, fodder for so many more conversations, I feel like.
Melanie L. Harris, you know, if you want to come hang out and have an interview, we're a fun time. So, and we liked your book, so why don't you come hang out? But can't use the word praxis. That is
the word praxis it's on the blacklist. No, I like it. Maybe I'm gonna start saying praxis.
I'm going to say pedagogy.
Ooh, oh my God.
Maybe I'll throw in a little anthropomorphine.
I don't think you said that right. But now that you said it that way, I can't think of the other
Diaspora.
Diasporic.
Diaspora.
Diasporic.
Anyways, all that to say, ladies, thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for taking the time to read this book, to dive into some eco-womanism with me. I one of my goals this season was to get us into an environmental focused episode, and I'm so glad that we did.
In the nick of time.
Yeah, in the nick of time.
We're wrapping up the season.
Yeah, I am so glad that we've had the opportunity to dive into a perspective that is so different and yet so similar to ours. That Melanie Harris took the time to write this book and to gift us with her beautiful, beautiful brain. Again, Melanie, if you want to come on the podcast,
listening.
We know you're.
Come on, guys. We're here for you. We actually did just get an author of one of our book reviews on, and that was a huge win.
Yep.
Yes. So
you never know.
I don't know if it's out yet or if it's about to come out, but you should listen to our episode with Linda K. Klein because it's a good one. She said some really, really great things, and it was a privilege to hear behind behind the doors of the author's mind of an author that we reviewed a book of. So anyways, all that to say, we hope that this sparked some thoughts for you, that all the intersections of environmentalism with every other kind of ism that you can think of was enlightening or affirming to ways that you've already been thinking about things, or was a challenging thing to open up new perspectives for you. We hope that this will get you guys thinking about how to be, a better partner with the earth. And ladies, I'm so thankful that I get to partner with the both of you. And that we get to sit here between our two plants. Some would argue our other two co-hosts of the podcast.
Been here from day one.
They've been here since day one.
It's amazing.
Our beautiful little plant buddies. We love them. And all that to say, we hope that you'll continue the conversation on environmentalism and eco-womanism, ecofeminism, and everything in between, upside down ways and every other way that you can think of it, on our Instagram, Woman Being Podcast. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform you prefer. We would love to hear what you think of this, and we would love to get you guys' book recommendations and topic recommendations.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, we'll be seeking out new books in the next season, and we want to know what you guys want to hear our opinions about and what you want to hear our reviews about, while a bit tipsy.
Yeah, so put our brains to work.
Yeah. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for sharing this space with us. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.